Welcome to a Surge Learning presentation on abuse and neglect. You make the choice to make a difference. This module is based on the legislation related to abuse and neglect in the Long-Term Care Homes Act 2007. Your home's policy and procedure must supplement this presentation. When we seek healthcare ourselves, we expect to receive quality care while being treated with dignity and respect. We want to feel as though our needs matter, something that we not only want for ourselves, but for our loved ones who require medical attention. You are not only a healthcare provider, but you may also be a parent, sibling, or partner, or juggle numerous jobs. Life outside of work can be stressful. When you enter your workplace to start your day, you might still feel the weight of your stressors. Now add a client or resident who persistently calls for help. Add a coworker who is taking their day out on you, and perhaps you are even short-staffed, so you have a lot on your plate. Although it may not be intentional, people can get frustrated and act inappropriately in the heat of the moment. It happens all the time, but we have to remember those clients or residents we were just talking about, those who rely on your care and attention. They are not the source of whatever stressful events happen to you prior to your workday. And keep in mind, your workplace is most likely their home or a place they go to feel safe and secure. Today we will talk about the Long-Term Care Homes Act 2007 as it pertains to resident abuse and neglect. We will touch on the Resident Bill of Rights and make reference to your organization's policies and procedures. We will discuss the training requirements and of course discuss the topic of abuse and neglect itself. You will review the types of abuse in this module, including underlying causes and how to create an abuse-free environment. We will touch on responsive behaviors and some strategies to consider. Let's begin with legislation. This section will take a look at the Long-Term Care Homes Act and the Residents' Bill of Rights. We will make reference to your organization's policies and procedures, the training requirements, and whistleblower protection. The foundation of the legislation is the residents' rights, among which are the right to be protected from abuse and the right not to be neglected. You will be familiar with the residents' rights as it will be posted throughout your home and reviewed at orientation. The Long-Term Care Homes Act requires that the employer have a policy on zero tolerance of abuse that includes understanding and recognizing the types of abuse, supporting a zero tolerance of abuse by posting information on how individuals can report witnessed or suspected abuse to the director, promoting a people-first care approach, understanding and strategizing for responsive behaviors, identifying how staff can make a report, and listing the requirements that the management team must investigate, document, and follow up, including any consequences. It is important that you be familiar with the policies and procedures pertaining to abuse and neglect and where to find the information you need. If ever unsure, please speak with your supervisor. A key factor in the prevention of abuse and neglect is education. You will be required to learn about the Resident Bill of Rights, the home's policy to promote zero tolerance of abuse and neglect, the requirement to report and how to do that, and the protection for those who report. To effectively create a home where there is no abuse and neglect, you are required to learn about abuse and how to prevent it. You may be wondering about reporting abuse and the whistleblower protection. What is a whistleblower? A whistleblower is someone who reports suspected or witnessed abuse and neglect. Perhaps you have encountered this and you are worried about retaliation if you make a report. The Whistleblower Protection is a requirement within the law or the Long-Term Care Homes Act that prevents retaliation such as dismissing or termination of employment, discipline or suspension, penalties, intimidation, coercion, or harassment. If you feel that your employer has retaliated, you will make a complaint to the Labor Board, who will investigate and follow up. The purpose of all of this is to ensure that abuse and neglect is reported, because when you witness abuse or even suspect abuse, and you do not take action, the abuse continues. Remember, you make the choice to make a difference. Be a whistleblower. Abuse of a client, patient, or resident is avoidable. Your organization has policies and procedures in place for abuse prevention, including a process for reporting and handling incidents of abuse. In order to effectively prevent abuse, it is important to understand the types of abuse and what each type includes or does not include. Before we go into the various types of abuse, let's see if you know what they are. If you aren't able to guess the correct ones, don't stress it. We will be spending the next portion of the presentation going through them in more detail. In this activity, identify the 6 types of abuse. To make a selection, click on the box beside each example on the right side of the slide. A blue check mark will appear when you have made your selections. Click Submit once you have found all 6. That is incorrect. Please try again. You have one. The answer is financial, emotional, physical, sexual, verbal, and neglect. In the following slides, we will review the various types of abuse: financial, emotional, physical, sexual, verbal, and neglect. What is financial abuse? What sorts of actions are considered financial abuse?
Grandma, that ring looks loose. I think you should give it to me for safekeeping.
This drag and drop activity relates to financial abuse. Click on the green box to the left of the slide, drag and drop it into the gray box titled Drop Answer Here. Let's look at the first example on the right together. A daughter takes funds from her mother's bank account to buy herself a new dress. Would this be theft, misuse of money, or misuse of property? Be sure to read the 3 examples on the right and determine the appropriate match for each. Once you have matched all 3, click Submit to continue. You have 2 attempts at this activity. That's right, you selected the correct response. Let's review the answers. Daughter takes funds from her mother's bank account to buy herself a new dress would be considered misuse of money. Son is out of work and borrows his dad's car. He rarely lets his dad use it. This would be an example of misuse of property. And a private caregiver feels that she is not paid enough for what she does. She takes a vase that the client will not miss. This is considered theft. The causes of financial abuse can be complex. The person misusing funds may be overcome with substance abuse, and possibly debt from this, or gambling, or bad business decisions. Sometimes children feel they deserve an inheritance and that mom or dad need not spend this money now. And a long history of difficult relationships may mean that the abuser does not feel remorse or is angry, and this justifies their actions. Next, we will take a look at emotional abuse. How would you define emotional abuse? Emotional abuse is behavior or remarks that threaten, intimidate, humiliate, or cause alarm or fear, emotional or psychological distress. It can also include threats and insults, intimidation, humiliating gestures, actions, behavior, or remarks, social isolation, shunning, ignoring, and lack of acknowledgement or infantilization. Emotional abuse involves any of the previously mentioned actions where the person performing the gestures, actions, behavior, or remarks understands and appreciates their consequences.
I sure hope Jack comes today.
Hi, Jack.
Hey, hi everybody. Hey.
Jack, come.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
There you go. Oh, Jack, you're wet again. You're not going to want to miss your game, so I'm going to change you later, okay?
Sometimes the causes of emotional abuse are related to caregiver burnout, a tired and frustrated caregiver who is overwhelmed by the significant needs of their loved one may be emotionally and physically exhausted. If the caregiver lacks the skill to provide the care needed, lacks an understanding of the resources available, or has an underlying mental illness or physical illness themselves, their coping mechanisms will be ineffective. This drag and drop activity pertains to emotional abuse. Click and drag each green box on the left of the slide to the gray boxes titled Drop Your Answer Here. Let's look at the first example on the right together. Does not have the skill or confidence to perform the task. Would this be a result of fatigue and unaware of respite? Would this be caused by a fear of G-tube? Or is this best matched with laughing at a client's dribbling? Match the green boxes on the left with their matches on the right and click Submit to continue. You have 2 attempts at this activity. That's right, You selected the correct response. Let's review the answers. Does not have the skill or confidence to perform the task. The correct match is scared of G-tube. Humiliation, a form of emotional abuse. This is best matched with laughs at clients dribbling. And wife is exhausted from 24-hour care of her husband and yells at him often. The match for this one is fatigue and unaware of respite. Let's take a look at physical abuse. What is physical abuse? Physical abuse includes physical force that causes injury or pain by anyone other than another resident. Client-to-client abuse has protocols to manage under your organization's policies and procedures. Physical abuse also includes the inappropriate use of medication. This may include over-sedating a resident to manage responsive behaviors or withholding pain medication. Physical abuse does not include the use of force that is appropriate to the provision of care or assisting a resident with activities of daily living unless the force used is excessive in the circumstances.
I really did want to see Landon falling over because, Deadpool, everybody else wanted to see Deadpool, and I'm like, I was outnumbered.
I couldn't bother seeing it because I think it's so certain things or something.
I know, it's so loud. Alice wanted to see the makeup, but Alice can't see it.
What are the underlying causes of physical abuse? Like emotional abuse, these may be rooted in heavy care burdens, burnout, and lack of support systems. Sometimes the caregiver has other stresses and uses ineffective coping when dealing with situations. In the next two examples, identify if this is an example of physical abuse. Select true if it is physical abuse and false if you feel that it's not. Let's take a look at the first example. Staff bathe a client in water that the client says is too cold. Click true or false and click submit to continue. That's right, you selected the correct answer. How about this one? John gets extra sedation at bedtime so his son can get more sleep. Is this an example of physical abuse? Select true or false and click submit to continue. That's right, you selected the correct response. This section looks at sexual abuse. Sexual abuse involves both consensual and non-consensual touching, behavior, or comments of a sexual nature. Please note the emphasis that it also involves consensual activities. For the purposes of the definition of sexual abuse in subsection 1, sexual abuse does not include touching, behavior, or remarks of a clinical nature that are appropriate to the provision of care or assisting a resident with activities of daily living, or consensual touching, behavior, or remarks of a sexual nature between a resident and a licensee or staff member.
Help! Help! Someone help! Help! Someone help! Help!
What's wrong?
I
There are multiple causes of sexual abuse. Click on all of the ones that apply. Once you have made your selections, click Submit to continue. You did not select the correct response. All of them can cause or lead to sexual abuse. Forcing a resident to view pornography in print or electronic media is misuse of the power balance between care provider and client and is considered sexual abuse. That's right, you selected the correct response. How about this example? A person having sexual relations with a spouse who is too cognitively impaired to consent and demonstrates fear and agitation is considered sexual abuse. Click True or False and click Submit to continue. That's right, you selected the correct response. This section looks at verbal abuse. Verbal abuse is any verbal communication, whether spoken or written, that is intimidating, degrading, belittling, or diminishes the client or resident's sense of self-worth, and includes any form of verbal communication of a threatening or intimidating nature, made by a resident that leads another resident to fear his or her safety, where the resident making the communication understands and appreciates the consequences.
Oh God, there's a nurse. Nurse, I need help. Nurse, I need help now, please.
I heard you the first time. Give me a minute, will you? You're not the only one need help, you know. What now?
Like other types of abuse, the causes of verbal abuse are similar and may be based in fatigue, frustration, and being overwhelmed with workload. Sometimes the caregiver and client relationship has been challenged for some time, and the added responsibilities may cause further deterioration of the relationship. It is also important to remember that sometimes, with the best intentions, we may belittle those that we care for by using names and voice tone more suitable to an infant. When clients need assistance with eating and toileting, it is easy to forget that they are not infants, and we need to remind ourselves to speak to them in a respectful manner. Which of the following are examples of verbal abuse? To make a selection, click on the checkboxes to the left of each option. Click Submit once you have identified the examples of verbal abuse. That's right, you selected the correct response. Next up, we will review neglect. What things do you think constitute neglect? Neglect is the failure to provide the necessities of life, including treatment, care, or services required for mental or physical well-being. Sometimes this failure to provide is intentional. However, at times it may be as a result of caregiver burden, lack of skills or knowledge, and being unaware of helpful resources. If the client is unable to express themselves or take action, they are more vulnerable to neglect.
Hi, Jackie. Your husband usually comes to feed you lunch. He should be here soon. So I'll check on you in about 20 minutes. Oh, you didn't touch your food. Maybe your husband brought you food from home. Hope it was good.
Again, we see that the causes of neglect are similar to those for other types of abuse and are related to caregiver burden, ineffective coping strategies, and uncaring nature. When a client is unable to express themselves or communicate in any way, neglect is more prevalent because no one can tell. In this drag and drop activity, we are reviewing neglect. Click and drag the green circles on the left of the slide and drop it into the gray circles titled Drop Answer Here. The idea is to match the three circles with their corresponding examples. Let's take a look at the first example on the right together. Long history of unkind behavior. Is this related to caregiver burden, being a vulnerable client, or caregiver lack of empathy? Click on the appropriate green circle and drag and drop it into the circle associated with the long history of unkind behavior. Once you have matched all three, click Submit to continue. That's right, you selected the correct response. Let's review the answers. Long history of unkind behavior is appropriately matched with caregiver lack of empathy. Exhaustion from meeting multiple needs of a client. This is matched with caregiver burden. And the client is unable to verbalize concerns. This is matched with vulnerable client. Recognizing the causes of abuse is one thing. Doing something about it is another. Abuse prevention can be considered from different perspectives. For our purpose, let's consider three perspectives: yourself, the informal caregiver, and the team. Consider yourself. Does this sound familiar? I am exhausted. I am frustrated. I feel overwhelmed and tearful. First of all, do not underestimate the need to care for yourself. This is not an indulgence, rather it is a necessity. You are busy and committed to a job with a great deal of responsibility, people and their quality of life. The people you care for can present many challenges due to responsive behaviors, end-of-life issues, and chronic disease. Added to that, you have another life, complete with bills, possibly children, and parents of your own, as well as life's up and downs. Sometimes it is just too much. Eventually you will run out of emotional and physical resources to manage both your work life and home life. This stress makes you more likely to be involved in an abusive situation that came about because of frustration and fatigue. It is important to acknowledge this and find whatever works to re-energize you and bring some calm. It may be quiet time, exercise, or socializing. Anything that works for you. Also, on those occasions where you feel especially frustrated, confide in a coworker or supervisor that you need a short break. In turn, you can repay this to a coworker who is having a bad day. Caregivers are often the last to identify when they are burning out. The caregiver may also have other issues, and there may be relationship issues from the past that influence how they interact. You, the employee, may notice things might be abusive or have the potential for abuse. Don't wait for the abuse to happen. Express your concerns and observations factually to your supervisor immediately. Here's an example. You might say, Mrs. Kristoff has been caring for her dad all day, every day for several years. She mentioned she is not sleeping and she is worried about money. Today she yelled at her dad while shaking her fist at him, saying, "Dad, it drives me crazy when you constantly pace the room. Just sit down, or I don't know what I'll do." The supervisor could access other resources such as support groups, respite care, and request a financial need assessment. Caring for persons who require assistance in their daily life presents challenges. This often includes trying to get everything done in a day based on a rigid, time-focused routine, forcing the person that you care for to fit into the routine. This elicits responsive behavior, which slows things down, causes frustration for the person and the staff, and sets up a potential for abuse. Let's take a closer look at responsive behaviors and some strategies that the team could work towards. For responsive behaviors, the team needs to always identify the problem and solutions. One effective intervention is to track the responsive behavior and look for patterns such as time of day or similar activities occurring at the time. This is called A, B, C, the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequences. You may identify that a certain time of day or a specific activity triggers a responsive behavior. For example, when it is noisy at mealtime, John gets angry and strikes out. Yet in small group programming with quiet people, John is engaged and smiling. This information now provides you with information to care plan and provide interventions, such as John is calmer in a quieter part of the dining room and with quiet table mates. This is also using a people-first approach, adjusting the environment to meet the needs of the person. Taking advantage of further education in responsive behaviors will give you more tools to use. The Long-Term Care Homes Act requires that the employer has a policy on zero tolerance of abuse that includes understanding and recognizing the types of abuse, supporting a zero tolerance of abuse by posting information on how individuals can report witnessed or suspected abuse to the director, promoting a people-first care approach, understanding and strategizing for responsive behaviors, identifying how staff can make a report, and listing the requirements that the management must investigate, document, and follow up, including any consequences. Staff should also be familiar with Whistleblower Protection for those who report. Take a few moments to reflect and create your action plan about the abuse policy. Ask yourself, sometimes the abusive incident is or might be a crime. In that case, the home must contact the police as soon as possible. The police will conduct their own investigation. The home must notify the director of this situation. When you witness abuse or even suspect abuse and you do not take action, the abuse continues. We are all responsible to stop the abuse. Know the signs and report what you witnessed or why you suspect abuse. Do so in a way that is factual and objective. You may take this to your supervisor immediately. Quick action ensures future safety of the resident. Then, complete the necessary documentation. Your supervisor will assist you with this. Today you learned about the Long-Term Care Homes Act and the residents' rights as the legislation that supports your home's policy on zero tolerance of abuse and neglect. You also learned about mandatory reporting and the whistleblowing protection for those who do report. You have a better understanding of your own learning requirements as a way to prevent abuse and neglect. The types of abuse, the underlying causes, and some preventative strategies were reviewed, followed with how to make a report, and the expectations around investigation and follow-up, including the police involvement where necessary. Surge Learning would like to recognize and extend our thanks to the participants from Advent Valley View residents for their involvement in acting out the video scenarios throughout this presentation. You make the choice to protect those who are vulnerable, those who depend on your voice, your actions, and your reactions. Stop abuse now. Thank you for joining us for this Surge Learning presentation on abuse and neglect. Please also familiarize yourself with your organization's policies and procedures around the prevention of abuse and neglect.